We're back. We just did a session, a quick session about cold or warm wines, and now we're doing a session about one of my favorite producers in California, Ridge. And these wines, Ridge has a couple of different locations. In Sonoma is where they have Old Vine Zinfandel and Rhone varieties. In Santa Cruz Mountains is where they have Bordeaux varieties for the reds and Chardonnay for the whites. And you've been there.
Little Springs.
Yeah, you went to Lytton Springs.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let me talk about the Santa Cruz Mountains. This is a very unusual place in the vast majority of vineyards. When you go up a hill or up a mountain, up in altitude, it gets colder, right? We all know that. Some of these vineyards, the Monte Bello Vineyard, is an exception to that rule because it's a very unusual place. So it's not uncommon, or it is common, especially in the mornings, for there to be a marine layer, so clouds. You lived in Huntington Beach. You can have clouds come in the morning, and they may not burn off or recede until the late morning, sometimes early afternoon, sometimes mid-afternoon, sometimes never. And it's more so in the Santa Cruz Mountain area. So you can have this marine layer come in, and so it's going to be pretty cool because the sunlight's not penetrating those clouds. Oh. As you go up the mountain or the slope, these vineyards are actually above the marine layer. Ooh. So there are photographs, maybe we can find one for the video, that are pretty cool that show the vineyard in sunlight and then down below all these clouds.
That's cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Or it's warm.
Okay.
And so it's a combination of some warmth of getting more sunlight, but that said, a mountain vineyard is a cool setting. Santa Cruz Mountains are a fairly cool area. The major red grapes there are Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir. And so it depends upon where they are in the Santa Cruz Mountains as to what they can grow. In the places that produce Pinot, the Cabernet would tend to be not nearly as good, tend to be fairly green. So one of the examples of California Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Bordeaux varieties that are more similar in structure to Bordeaux, or certainly the way Bordeaux used to be before climate change. In the 1976, right, the tasting in Paris that Stephen Spurrier put on, Chateau Montelena won the Chardonnay, and Stag's Leap won the Cabernet Sauvignon or Bordeaux varieties. The Ridge was in there, and the Ridge did reasonably well, though on subsequent tastings of that same vintage, the Ridge has done very, very well and has held up over time beautifully. We're going to visit these wines. They're not of the same vintage, but that really doesn't matter all that much. In terms of vintages, I have some magnums of the Ridge Monte Bello going back over a decade. And so I'm going to arrange a vertical tasting that we'll do at my home sometime in the next couple of months.
Great.
And we'll have some of my other MW friends come on down. We'll cook food and we'll have a feast. Does that sound good?
What are you going to cook?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got Cabernet Sauvignon, 2014.
Okay.
I've tasted every vintage of Ridge Monte Bello for quite some time, and buy the Ridge Monte Bello. That was the only vintage I didn't buy it because I didn't like the way it tasted in the tasting room through two different bottles of wine. So I preferred the estate wine. Estate wine is...
Wine?
Is this the same? This is the Monte Bello? Yeah, this is the Ridge estate. So it's from the Monte Bello Vineyard. These tend to be younger vines. And they have different blocks. So some blocks may make it into the Monte Bello, other blocks make it into the estate wine. And the 2017 is the Merlot. So the other thing to remember, that in certain parts of the world, if it says a variety on it, it has to be 100%. Mm-hmm. In other parts of the world, it's 85%. Oregon, Washington State, 85%. Many parts of Europe, 100%. In California, it only has to be 25%. If you have 75% or more in the bottle, they can put Cabernet Sauvignon on the label. Or Merlot, whatever the main variety is. It turns out the Cabernet Sauvignon is 75% Cabernet Sauvignon, 14% Merlot, 6% Petit Verdot, and 5% Cabernet Franc. So a pretty typical blend that one would could find in the left bank, in the Médoc. And the second wine is 100% Merlot. So Merlot is the main grape variety in parts of Saint-Emilion, more so in Pomerol. There are a few 100% Merlots in both Saint-Emilion and Pomerol, but they tend to be rare because they tend to be blended with Cabernet Franc. I'm excited to have the 100% Merlot.
I've never tasted rich Merlot.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Let's taste the Merlot, and then we'll compare it to the Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah. Which one's Merlot?
On your right-hand side. Well, do this. Take a look at the colors between the two of them. Both are pretty dense color. There's a little turbidity, right? Haziness, because there was a fair amount of sediment in the 2014. The 2017 Merlot's got a bit more reddish purple color, and the older Cabernet Sauvignon has a little bit of brick change. The Cabernet is a little bit denser in color. And this is warmed up closer to cellar temperature. So the taste characteristics of Merlot compared to Cabernet Sauvignon. Merlot tends to be more generous than Cabernet Sauvignon, meaning a slightly rounder mid-palate. But a lot of folks don't understand that Merlot is found in a place like Monte Bello Vineyard or in many parts of Bordeaux is not this plush, rich, round wine. It can be pretty darn tight. And so this is fairly tight still. It's still a fairly young wine. We'll compare its structure to the slightly older Cabernet Sauvignon. Plum tends to be a frequent descriptor for Merlot, as well as a hint of leather. Let's see if we find either one or any other things. And there's a generous amount of oak on here. And there's some plum, there's some leather, there's other dark fruit there. There's some spiciness from the oak. It's pretty well integrated. It left on your palate a bit. Still taste it. But you got pucker from the tannins. Pucker.
Okay.
So the tannins can give you body, but they give you astringency. It's drying.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So normally, permission to do medical geekiness. Right. So your saliva lubricates your mouth and makes your mouth slippery. Right? Saliva is slippery because it's got glycoproteins and mucoproteins, right, which are sugars bound to a protein, and they can be polymers as well, but that gives the slipperiness that one associates with saliva. Those mucoproteins are positively charged, the tannins are negatively charged, and so the tannins and the mucoproteins bind together, and it makes your saliva not so slippery. You can feel your tongue touching and your cheeks touching together. That's giving what I was calling the pucker from the tannins. Okay. There's a good amount of extract on it. You can see pigment in the legs or the tears. There's a certain amount of artifice, and by artifice, I mean, not quite a fake out, but a little bit, because normally, if we have a fine bottle of red wine, you're going to evaluate that bottle of red wine not over a 2 or 3 minute period of time. Or same thing if you're doing a blind wine. Somebody serves you a blind wine, okay. Sometimes you immediately know what it is. With many other wines, what it really needs is time, right? So you taste the wine, jot down some impressions that you have about the color and the structure and the taste. But often, for you really to fully evaluate that wine, especially if it's a tough one, you need some period of time for that wine to evolve in the glass. And for some young wines, some age-worthy red wines, sometimes that you need half an hour to fully be able to evaluate it. But that said, it's a nice wine. The VA blew off. When you look on the back label, it says that they use the minimum effective SO2 levels. Maybe they need to bump up the minimum effective SO2 levels just a tad. But it's now becoming more open. It's got more fruit.
Yeah.
I'm getting a hint of cedar in there that normally I associate with Cabernet, older Cabernet, but I'm finding it here. And some oriental spices. It's turned into a beautiful wine that would be much better eating food with it than just drinking it on its own. Though it's certainly a delightful wine. If there's somebody who had this in their cellar and wanted to drink it today, I would encourage them to decant it for a few hours before they served it. And this wine's going to last for a long time. Did you like it?
I like it.
I like it a lot.
Let's get some pizza. It's really similar with the Cabernet Sauvignon.
Can be very, very similar, can be very difficult to differentiate.
Yeah.
So if you've got a Cabernet Sauvignon that's from a somewhat warmer climate, and the producers have been very good about tannin management, those wines can be very difficult to differentiate with Merlot. Similarly, if you have Merlot grown, you have mountain fruit Merlot in Santa Cruz Mountains, Spring Mountain, other parts of Napa or Sonoma where you have hillsides, those wines structurally can be very much more like Cabernet Sauvignon than Merlot. So a lot of it depends upon where it's grown. Now to give you an idea, sort of price-wise, this would be, certainly once the VA had blown off, a very nice Merlot by any standards on any part of the globe. Now, top quality Pomerol is going to cost you a couple $100 a bottle or more, and this costs less, right? What did it cost?
Half of it. I probably paid like $90.
Probably paid about $90. But again, there's something to be said that when you're evaluating a really nice wine, it needs some time. And also, like I said, straight out of the bottle is not the best time to evaluate it, because if there is some VA there, you'll sense it more than you will right afterwards, and after it's been open for a period of time. It was nice enough I had a hard time spitting, so I didn't spit the last couple of takes.
I've never.
We like the Merlot a lot. Merlot used to be a very popular variety in the United States until a movie more than 20 years ago called Sideways.
I like that movie.
It's a very cool movie. And there was a line in the movie where one guy says, Merlot sucks. Merlot's prices and popularity went down from the movie, and also went down because as the popularity of Merlot increased, you had more and more people making Merlot, some of whom didn't make Merlot all that well, or importing Merlot, cheap Merlot from places that didn't do a good job making Merlot either. So the overall quality went down. But that said, purchasing wine, let's say here in California, from the same producer, you will pay less from a top quality producer for their Merlot than you will pay for their Cabernet Sauvignon. And their top quality Merlot can be every bit as good as their Cabernet Sauvignon. So that can be a way to save a few bucks.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. So let's turn our attention to Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet, generally thicker skins, perhaps maybe not smaller berries than the Merlot. Ages beautifully, tends to be more tannic. And so let's see what we smell this one. So this wine was a little bit cloudy, a little bit turbid, because it had been laying sideways and then upright.
You did it.
This is a leaner style of wine, right? So the Merlot was pretty lean, wasn't voluptuous, but it had some curves. This one doesn't have any curves, even though it's blended with some Merlot and Cabernet Franc to give some roundness. The Petit Verdot is going to also be fairly linear. And what we mean linear is that from the time you taste it, the structure doesn't change as time goes on in your mouth. So let's take another sniff. It's still pretty tight, right? There's there may be cassis there. There's just a hint of greenness, but pleasant greenness. Cabernet Sauvignon often has some green notes, unless somebody's gotten it so ripe and it starts tasting like raisins, which I don't like at all. Some spiciness from the oak. Oak is fairly well integrated, even though if I hadn't seen the color, right, this wine looks a bit older. It's got some slight brick change at the rim. There's maybe still a hint of purple in the Merlot. This tastes younger, right? In terms of just the structure. You've got really pronounced tannins. The tannins don't overwhelm the fruit. I still have pretty cassis fruit on my palate, but it's a different structure of wine, and this is a wine that certainly you'd want to be having with food as well. And what you were saying about having a pizza, there's nothing wrong with having a pizza with a fine wine. People argue that if you have complex wines, enjoy them with simple foods. If you have complex foods, enjoy them with simpler wines. Because when you have a very complex food and a very complex wine, they can fight. They can fight, yeah. You don't want the wines fighting.
Okay.
Or, I mean, obviously, at wine tastings that I've gone to around the globe, people who have fine Cabernet Sauvignon or fine Merlot are going to be making beef or lamb, some unctuous meal, and the wines tend to be glorious with that. But you could have either of these fine bottles of wine with a terrific hamburger that you make at home, or you go to pay for some crazy price in a top quality steakhouse or restaurant. But that can be a way to enjoy it. You can enjoy these with some nuts, with some cheese. There's many different ways to enjoy the wine. To enjoy them with friends. If you're having great wine with people you don't like, that is a disservice to the wine and yourself. But if you're having the wine with friends, it's a good way to talk about it. And what do you think about the wines?
I like both of those, and
How are they different in your opinion?
it has more acid in it.
More acid in it?
Yeah.
And it may or may not, but here's the thing. The more astringent the tannins are, so tannins and acidity can work hand in hand. So if you have the same wine, two wines, the same amount of tannin, and we adjust the acidity, so the first wine has more acid, the acid will seem higher and the tannins will seem higher. Okay? Now let's say we have two wines that have the same tannin, the same wines, have the same acid rather, two wines, and now one we make the tannins higher. The wine we have the higher tannins, the acid will also seem higher.
Okay.
Okay, so it's called a tannin acid balance. So it's a combination of the two that if you bump up the acidity, the tannins will seem harsher. If you bump up the tannins, the acidity will seem more pronounced. I suspect sometimes they put the pH on the back. I don't think that they did though.
So I feel more tannin here too.
Yeah, and there's definitely more tannin. So the question is, how much of it is more acidity in the wine? And it may be both. There's more tannin and more acid. I think that 2014 was probably slightly less ripe, which for me is a good thing, in the days of global climate change than the 2019. And I agree with you. I think that the acid is higher in the...
I got it.
You got it. Though everything is relative. So now, when I go back, the Merlot's changed again. Another taste characteristic that you can find in Merlot is chocolate. And this now has some chocolate to it. So as the wine is evolving and warming up, it's changing. It's now tasting smoother and rounder, and it's all in relation. Compared to the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Merlot is rounder. Compared to a Pinot Noir, the Merlot would be leaner. Let's talk about aging these wines. A lot of it depends upon your patience level and your storage. Do you have a storage area that you can have temperature control? Right. So here in the state of California, I live near the ocean. It's a pretty moderate temperature the vast majority of the time here. And so in my cellar, I have an unusual house that has a cellar here. These wines would age well for 10, 15, 20 years, easy.
20?
Yeah, either of these wines can age well for 20 years. One may question, why would you age them that long? Because right now, this Merlot, after we've had it open for a while, is pretty delicious. And yes, it'll get softer in the next 3 to 5 years. Is there any reason to age it longer than that? Probably not. So if you've got space and you buy a case of it, okay, follow it over time. The Cabernet Sauvignon often requires more age to soften the wine. Or you can get around that sometimes by just opening it up, decanting it for 2 hours, 4 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, depending upon how the wine tastes. In many parts of the world, in Seoul, where you're from, Min, what percentage of the people have wine cellars?
People who love wines, they usually have wine cellars.
Okay, so it'd be a refrigerated unit.
Right.
Somebody has that, and the space and the inclination, that Cabernet Sauvignon is certainly a wine that they could lay down for a slightly longer period of time. But again, Peter and I, we've spoken about this in the past. I've lost pleasure from wines by aging them too long. Though it's a fun thing to do if you have a case of it, and you say, try one now, try another one 6 months from now. So that's a learning experience.
But if you just have one, you don't do it, right?
You're taking the risk.
If you just have one, you're taking the risk. And again, I mean, how many people are going to have one bottle and you're going to say, I'm going to age this for the next 7 or 10 years? It depends upon the producer. There are producers that have a track record, and you can read about vertical tastings and how the wines age if cellared well. And you can generally follow that. Sometimes a wine critic or a wine producer will put down when they think that wine should be consumed. And if it's a relatively obscure producer or relatively new producer, or if the wine critic hasn't had their wines as they aged, they're guessing. And sometimes they can be, FOS. They could be wrong.
FOS?
Full of shite. It is true. Many years ago, I was in a tasting group, and some of the guys had really nice cellars. They were older than me and had beautiful categories of the wines. And so we had a tasting of, I think it was a 1970 Bordeaux vintage. This is probably in the late 80s. And so this guy had a good number of 1970 Bordeaux, so we had them blind. We only knew that they were 1970s. They were put in paper bags. And we had the Robert Parker Guide to Bordeaux. After a while, he stopped producing the Guide to Bordeaux because I don't think he was particularly all that good with Bordeaux. And Robert Parker did amazing things in the world of wine and was acclaimed. But when we tasted the wines as a group, blind, and then later read what his recommendations were, so which wines were good and which were more good, less good, and the time period that the wine should be consumed in, there's no correlation with what he wrote and what we were tasting in those wines. So again, it'd be different if you're tasting Bordeaux and somebody who specializes in Bordeaux, and they spent their lifetime with Bordeaux, and even then, it's going to be tough to be that accurate and that able to predict how the wines are going to taste, especially now with climate change. Because one producer aged or needed 20 years to show 30 years ago, that same producer may not need more than 5 years to show, or may show fine upon release. Does that make sense?
All right.
So, what did we do? We
Comparing Cabernet and Merlot?
Cabernet and Merlot from one producer, albeit from two different vintages, and a very fine producer. And we discussed how the Monte Bello Vineyard is in a very unique setting in California, how it often has a structure more like some of the finer Bordeaux. So is it Bordeaux? Absolutely not. Most wine regions are looking for a marketing advantage over other wine regions. In Bordeaux, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when Bordeaux was 12.5% alcohol and California Cabernet was 13.5% alcohol, the folks in Bordeaux said, too much alcohol in the California Cabernets at 13.5%. Ours is perfect at 12.5%. Though at the same token, the reason that the Judgment of Paris in 1976, that the California wines did very well, some of them did very well, is that the people in Bordeaux equated ripeness with a better vintage. And so those slightly riper Cabernet Sauvignons tended to do pretty well. So now we fast forward to today, whereas Bordeaux used to be 12.5%, Bordeaux Reds, and that often, for many vintages, was with adding sugar to the juice to ferment up to a higher alcohol level. And California Cabernet was 13.5%. Now we're showing the Bordeaux's at 14, 14.5, 15, 15.5% alcohol. And so that is, in the California Cabernets, it depends upon where. Because of the unique climate at Ridge, the Merlot's 12.5%, which is what Bordeaux used to be.
13.7.
And this is the Cabernet's 13.7. It's an interesting thing that, so in many ways, Ridge Monte Bello and the Ridge Estate, that has remained more constant because of its unique place climate-wise, less influenced by climate change than the Napa Valley has been or Bordeaux has been. So it's a pretty wild thing, huh?
Right.
We just took a little slice in time, spoke about the wine. You like the wines?
Yeah.
You love the wines? I love both the wines.
Let's drink.
Let's drink the wine. So tune in.
Yeah.
Sign up. Give some thumbs up.
Sign up. Sign up on YouTube.
And cheers.
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 Cheers. Thank you.
You're welcome.